Now this little short video is going to be about replacing the chain and some of the little things that I've learned over the years of replacing chains. Today's little project is to change the chain on our FCR. Now there's millions of good chains available, and we got this one from Dennis Kirk. It's an RK chain, it's an X-ring. Relatively high-end chain, it's about $150. When we're doing this, we're going to replace the countershaft sprocket also. Now usually what you would want to do, if everything else was perfect, you would want to replace the both sprockets and the chain as a unit. Not the case, because in this case we've already replaced the back sprocket, and that's got very little mileage on it. So now we're going to replace the chain and the countershaft sprocket. Now normally they say you should get between 15 and 20,000 miles out of a chain. We've got 19.7, and I'm sure this chain has never been replaced. It's the factory chain, and the last couple of rides I've been on, because I've checked it with my gauge, I was actually getting a little nervous that we're getting near the end. It was showing that it was time to replace it on the gauge. By the way, there's a lot of good YouTube videos on similar things, but this is the one we're going to be doing today. Got out our lift, and by the way, that lift has paid such dividends since I've got it from Harbor Freight. You just can't imagine how convenient that is, especially on a day like today. To do this job, which basically is you're on your hands and knees if you don't have a lift, but when you have a lift and you have the little stand to take the back end up for doing the final adjustments, having the right tools just makes this job very, very easy. Now, the job should take between 2 and 3 hours depending on how much cleanup there is. And I've tried to set aside a part of the day to where I wouldn't be interrupted, but it didn't matter because Glenn came over anyway for a nice little visit during this day, right at exactly the right time. So it actually worked out pretty well. Again, I like to set everything up. I like to put a towel underneath because we're going to be doing a lot of parts cleaning. Anytime you pull a countershaft sprocket, this area here just fills up. In this case, we've got 20 years of grease in there. On an FCR, you've got to pull several other little parts: the shift linkage, the master cylinder, the little slave cylinder that operates the clutch. All of these little things have to be removed. This side of the fairing has to be loosened up so it could be pulled away. The little slave cylinder, this has a hydraulic clutch. Again, none of this stuff is really high-tech. The biggest part of the job, I would say at least half of the time that you spend doing this job, you do cleaning parts. And so I've set up my tub outside with parts cleaner, anticipating, and I was not disappointed, anticipating what would be inside this countershaft, where the countershaft sprocket rides. A combination of 22 years of grit and dust and dirt and sand and dead bugs and snakes and who knows what else. Anyway, this side cover is magnesium, so I want to treat it relatively with kid gloves. Once I got it off, I examined this area, and of course this is just, this is going to be a mess. So I have a nice little technique that I've developed for doing this. Is the first thing I do while I'm going to do my parts cleaning is let everything soak with WD-40. I got a whole full can. I'll probably use the whole can. Then while that's soaking in, I can take this out to this is just ordinary parts cleaner, and let it soak for half an hour, 20 minutes, whatever. Start getting the grit off with a little brush. Start with a rough brush, end with a fine brush. Because it's magnesium, again, I want to be delicate with it. It's just probably a part that's very expensive to replace or unobtainable. Who knows? This bike's 22 years old, so the grit that's inside of it has been there for a long time. And depending on what kind of chain lubricant you use, this area really gets gritty. But again, I knew this ahead of time. I anticipated this would be a good amount of time. So while I was cleaning that part, I had my WD-40 soaking in here. And so this is all loosened up very nice. This is now going to be a little bit easier with a little bit of compressed air. This is the nylon spacer that's supposed to be immaculately clean. Well, again, once it's clean, that's what it looks like. Before, after, before, after. Yep, a lot of grit in there. So I know now a couple mistakes you can make on a job like this. Number one is that usually, not always, usually that this nut on the countershaft is really on there. Now the last time when I did the Suzuki chain, I had to use that little air hammer to get it off. No matter how I tried, I couldn't get it off. The RD one came right off. This one actually, because I have a breaker bar on my big wrench, this one, once I released and I had it soaking in WD-40 for a long time, maybe that's a combination of it. It actually, and once I had the breaker bar on there, it popped right off. So I was thrilled, thinking, wow, I got a little bit of a break on that. And you don't always get a break. And once you get these parts, these old parts off, of course, there's going to be grit behind it. And I've seen some people that have, you know, either done it themselves or taken it to a dealer, and the guy that replaces the chain, they charge you for 2 or 3 hours of labor, but they don't clean behind here, not the way I would anyway. So I'm much happier being able to do it myself. I know most of this grit will be cleaned. It'll add to the life of the chain. It'll, number two, will let me sleep better at night. And this is, when a part's 22 years old, this is what you expect to come off. Now, a lot of times that I've talked to a lot of people that really know a lot about this kind of stuff, they say you can look at the countershaft sprocket, and if you can see that it's worn, it's way, way, way overdue to be replaced. In this case, it didn't look too bad, but the chain was at the limit on the gauge, and I really didn't want to be one of these cute people that tries to skimp on. The countershaft sprocket was only $19 for this bike, so cheap insurance. Again, once you pull that sprocket, all this grit behind here, I want to clean as much as possible, but I also don't want to get any grit in by this seal that seals the bearing. That's a relatively important bearing, and if you have to replace it now, I did spend a lot of time between these two photos, dirty, clean, dirty, clean. This is kind of cool to do this. But once that's all cleaned up, then I've used compressed air to get the last little bit, and parts cleaner on paper towels to get in there. Got all the grit off my clutch rod, all the grit off the shaft, the shift shaft. Now, and this is kind of funny, I guess. Over the course of my illustrious career of many, many years, I have had some really cheesy chain breakers that I bought for 20 bucks or whatever, and they work like they're worth 20 bucks. Now, when I did and I think I did this when I did the Suzuki chain, I was at Circle Cycle at Pete's, and he talked me into buying this. This is a relatively expensive tool. It's about 80 bucks. And I've never regretted spending the money, because a day like today, when you've got to use it, first off, you could cut the chain, and when we did Tim's chain, remember, a lot of other people use my equipment here, so when we did Tim's chain, Tim was having fun figuring out how to do this, and I know he did, but cutting the chain was a little bit more of a job, and we just took a cutoff wheel and cut it. But I wanted to show on the video how nice this is when you have a good quality tool. Boy, oh boy, you can choke to death here. Anyway, let's back this up. Excuse me. The pin on this is a really hardened steel. And what you're paying for with a high quality tool is just better quality steel. Now, as many times as I've used this, I haven't got a scratch on it, so it really is. When I bought it, I was thinking, oh, $80, wow, a lot of money. And every time I use it, it's like using any other high quality tool now. And once that chain is cut, And that chain's going bye-bye after 20,000 miles, 19,000. Now the fun part of the job, putting together the clean parts, parts that have been cleaned. Everything buttons right up pretty predictably. Now, the other thing is, and I lucked out with this because the stock chain is 110 links, and I ordered a 110 link chain, which it came 110 links. And the nicest thing now is I've saved one step of having to cut off a link or two, but never order a chain that's one link too short. If the book says it's 110, get a 110 link chain. And putting that extra link in and having all those extra things to crimp, So anyway, once that nut is snugged up and the pinch locker is put back on, peened over, we know that's going to be pretty good, pretty safe. What I did, just for my own, and I know this is my own information, I know in the past I've taken all the slack out of the chain adjuster, bring it all the way forward, because a lot of times you can actually make the bike, you can cut a link off and it'll still fit on here. But the problem with that is when you get this as far forward as it'll go, a lot of times that 1 inch makes the bike, especially an RD type of bike, or this bike, which is geared pretty low in first gear, it makes it really wheelie prone. And so I was trying to see if it would fit with the, of course they recommend 110 links. I was hoping I wasn't going to have to do that. But after I did all a little mock-up, got the swing arm as far forward as it would go, the chain adjuster inside the swing arm, took out the beautiful new chain, and of course it's coated with grease, so now you get the grease on everything. But it looked like I could have, I really had to make a decision here. Did I want to have the chain all the way back? Did I want to, because once you cut that link, you're pretty much married to it unless you want to put 2 master links in or an extra link, and I don't want to do that, believe me. You wind up, you know, just, it's not a good experience for me anyway. I've done it, and I don't like doing it. I would rather have one of those press links in the chain, especially on a bike this powerful. So, the other thing is, these are X-ring chains. They're very high-end chain. They come with a little extra O-rings, and they can be a little tricky. Now, this can be one of the parts of the job that if you have a helper and you have some extra hands and feet and noses, and yeah, you can get all of these little O-rings on. You can get it pressed in place, get the grease back on that shaft. The trouble is, once you put the extra plate on, now you've got to hold the plate in place more or less and then get the tool in place. And of course you can do it, but boy, if you have a helper, does that make it a lot easier. And again, once these ends are peened over, they have a part that's just for this. It is really, really important to me to get this link in right. I've seen guys that the thing you can do wrong is over-peen this and then put a stress on this link to where this link, you squeeze the O-ring and it doesn't want to turn the way it should. Or in some way you've distorted the tension on this. So I'm really careful when I do this to make sure I get these the way they should be. And if you do enough of them, the first one you do, you probably got to do 2 or 3 times. Then you get a feel for just how tight that has to be. And and Tim did it, by the way. When Tim did this, he got a feel for it. And the next day he was going to Nova Scotia with his new chain. So I guess over the years and after screwing up a few times, we've kind of figured out how to do it. Now, once that new chain is on, I wanted to try to take some WD-40 and get as much of the outer grease off. The reason is, after you go for the first ride, that grease is getting all over the back tire, the back rim, and since it's a sealed chain, we really don't have to overdo it. I'm going to put a little chain wax on. There's already enough grit on here and grease. And the thing that I don't like about the first time you put a new chain on, in the olden days, it used to be the chain would have to be stretched. And the first couple of rides you went on, you'd have to readjust it. Well, these modern chains, and at least the one I put on a Suzuki, it was good right from the get-go. And I read the instructions that come with RK chains, and it says they're pre-stretched. Well, maybe they're right. And I'm not always a big believer in believing what the sales tell you, but anyway, buttoning it back up when you have nice clean parts, it's a pleasure working on the bike. But that first day, that first hour when you're cleaning parts can be pretty disgusting. And it was funny, by the time Glenn had actually got here, we had a cup of coffee, the hard work, the disgusting work was done. So, and he had clean clothes on, so that, I thought that was pretty funny. Now, once that chain cleaned up, and of course there's still plenty of grease on it on the outside. I don't want to put it in parts cleaner, but again, I don't want to have big globs of this. And I've actually had so much grease on it that it's gotten on the back of your pant leg. Because again, another thing, a lot of people don't agree with this, but I try never to have a chain guard on a bike. I like to be able to see the chain. It's a visual thing. And the chain guards that come on bikes are usually so flimsy that they're not going to protect you if this chain breaks. That chain guard's just going bye-bye. So anyway, it's my personal prejudice. I do like to see the chain. I think the chain, I like to see the mechanical part of a motorcycle. And that's just one of my little prejudices. And so having a new chain and being able to take the bike out in the sun and get a real nice look at how it's looking, and of course then I've got to clean everything up in the shop, look at the bike from every possible angle, and I really, there's a point in time when I look at this and I think, wow, now, and this is a funny way to look at it, I'm 68 years old. This first chain lasted 22 years, 23 years. Now, if this chain that I just put on lasts 23 years and I'm still riding, or what's probably going to happen, my son or son-in-law is going to be riding a bike. So I think we're good to go. And again, it's just one of the things that I knew that somewhere down the road I would have to replace this chain in the next year or so, and there was no point in not replacing it now. It's one of the things that when you think about it, what would be the point of saving it? Because if it did any damage to the bike or your leg or broke in service, I'm not sure that even 20,000 miles is probably pushing it. Because on my gauge it showed that we were right at the end of the useful life. So, and again, we hopefully have some good years ahead of us and some good rides. And all that's left is our test ride. And as I always do at the end of one of these jobs, get it out in the sun and check it out.
Well, the only thing left is the best part, the test ride. These little tips or whatever information I've been able to put on this video is in some way helpful, or at worst that it's entertaining. Hey, and thanks for watching. We're going for a ride,
And we're going to try not to choke to death.